For me, it was never about one single institution or even necessarily one single industry. It really was always about a personal mission. And my personal mission has really always focused on how to creatively leverage existing resources for the purposes of community change, of equity and justice. And ultimately, after having spent time at a place like the Rockefeller Foundation, and I also have a background as an academic, and having spent time at different universities as a faculty member, I realized that probably the best way for me to contribute was in a more independent setting, which ultimately led to the creation of Marga Incorporated. And this group has ultimately lasted over quite some period of time and has actually seen some real changes in philanthropy over the course of that period. So what's happening is that there's this increased level of interest, and certainly I think there has been more movement in some foundations in terms of their policies and practices. On the one hand, we're encouraged by the racial reckoning of the last few years. But on the other hand, you can see that there is clearly a growing reaction to or a backlash to that racial reckoning in various parts of the country. Yeah. And what does that mean for foundations and how foundations do work? That does it ultimately challenge some of the things that are going on and voter suppression, opposition to so-called critical race theory? Are there direct responses to that in philanthropy? Is philanthropy going to stand strong as some of that level of opposition gains steam? So there's a lot to really consider in this regard. Philanthropy is a very relational field. I don't think that has entirely changed. It is a field in which relationships open doors. And so how do we find ways to create more pathways for people of color, for BIPOC folks to enter philanthropy, I think is really important. But in terms of what you could do to be proactive, if you're a person who wants to enter philanthropy and figure out a way, maybe you've been on the other side in the nonprofit sector and want to figure out a way to get into philanthropy. For me, one of the things that was important, of course, this was many years ago, it was conversations, and it was informational interviews with people who were at different foundations. And so there are real creative and interesting ways in which foundations can be transformative in their local communities, within themselves as institutions. I think whenever we look at this work, we have to talk about being mutually transformative. We can't have foundations that simply say, I want to send more grants to BIPOC communities and not self-reflect on themselves in terms of what is their own level of commitment to racial equity, how do they operate as an institution. It's not just about sending out grant dollars, it's also about looking at and reflecting on your practice